It's 8:02.
Because our 30-something people are not here and they're going to be complaining if we don't record it. So let's
They
go.
they probably couldn't make it due to the weather.
Yeah, because the wind chill is zero there. Yeah, sure that's what it is. Or they're all just coming on now. All right, I'm going to pray. We're going to go through the review. Then I'm sure more people will be here. Thanks, Father. You know what at least my heart is, that you are glorified in all this. But obviously, when there's controversy and debate and difficult interpretations, sometimes we like to win. And help us as we do this to be humble and to be kind and good. And I think most of us are at it out for the truth. We want to know what you think and how we should act and how we should understand the world. So help us to see that today, how to reimagine this text, this library of texts for this new world that we're living in, how it can lead us into a more flourishing life. That's what we're looking for. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay. So this is my Vanna pose. Here we go. Here's the things that we're talking about. The Bible and homosexuality, in case you didn't come to the right place, go somewhere else real quick. It's another classroom down the hall. First one, kindness and humility. I already prayed that. We're good. That's the review from the last week and the last week and the 4 years before this, the 5 years that we've been doing this. Okay. We want to be kind and humble and realize that not everybody on here thinks like you or acts like you. So whether you are straight or gay or anything like that, you are welcome. We're having conversations, just thinking this stuff through. And we're going to be honest, and we might make dumb jokes and we might offend you, and we're not meaning to. I hope we're not meaning to, but please forgive us when that happens. We talked, these are the things that we kind of been talking about for the last 2 weeks. I'm hoping maybe that we'll finish today. And then next week that Dr. Bandy will be able to come and kind of present it all in one big presentation, which should be awesome because he's done a lot more work on this, as you noticed from last week. So the first thing we talked about here was just remembering when we're talking about all this stuff that we come with certain biases to the text. A lot of us have ick factors. In fact, all of us have ick factors, one direction or another, or in different regards. That is, we have taboos in our life that culture has taught us, or that biology has taught us, our particular genetics. All those things apply as we interpret scripture. So we're going to see certain things, especially today as we're dealing with Romans 1, like naturally versus unnaturally, because naturally means something to us. We think of it as this is the way everybody must think because this is the way our brain or biology or things like that work. So we just want to be careful that our ick factor doesn't get in the way of our exegesis. Okay, just recognize it, realize that you think certain things are gross that other people don't think are gross, and we can move past that and plan on actually dealing with the text itself and see what it's doing. Orientation versus action is another thing we've got to remember as we look at each one of these texts, right? This word is not in the Bible. It might be in your Bible because they translated it that way, but it's not in the Bible, right? Of course, there's no English words in the Bible, right? They're all from Hebrew or Greek or something like that, Aramaic. But this is a poor translation if we recognize that homosexuality is an orientation, which is how we talk about it today. So that's how the word has meaning to us. It means we have a sexual proclivity towards somebody who is like us, right? That's what that is. It's not, we're not talking about an action, or maybe sometimes we are. We just need to recognize these are different things. When the Bible's talking about it, probably, at least let's bring it up in our minds, it's not mentioning this because that just doesn't, that's not something they think through, orientation. And they're talking about actions usually. That's what is right or wrong, if that's what the text is doing. It's the actions. Okay, it's not the proclivity towards. So, anyway, keep that in mind. Ancient Near Eastern world view. The way the Bible comes out of this ancient Near Eastern culture. We spent a lot of time talking about this. This is a question of order. Okay. By the way, this is probably a really good place for me to throw this in. Order is probably one of the major things that's going on throughout the entire Hebrew Bible. Things that are askew or outside of the proper order are what we call sin. Okay, and that might be too strong of a term to put it like that, but that's how they think of things that are right or wrong. Things that are wrong are things that are outside of the order that they would understand it. Most of the Bible texts that are being put out there are questions of order. Who's on top, right? Quite metaphorically, right? Even the creation story, right from the very beginning, the second creation story in Genesis chapter 1 is all about order. It's about quelling, putting your foot on, conquering these gods of chaos. And that's going to continue throughout all the Bible, all the way to Jesus, talking about the storm or casting out demons or healing the sick. Those are all order moves, okay? Bringing back into the way things are supposed to be. Okay, so in their world, they have certain orders. You've probably brought this up in your worlds too, especially if you grew up in conservative kinds of churches. You had some sort of an umbrella principle: God, man, or God husband, if we're being more careful, wife, children, I don't know, animals, whatever, right? There's an order to these kinds of things. And so you think in this hierarchy, okay? That might not be the way you're supposed to think, but it's definitely the way they thought about things. There was an order. Even if they thought, well, these people are equal, still one had more power, one had more authority in that situation. So metaphorically, image-wise, we're talking about order, but we're also talking about a hierarchy literally, physically. So I read you a bunch of things from some ancient Mesopotamian omens that talk about the penalties, the problems that you have if you end up on the bottom during an act of sexuality, right? If you're having sex and you're on the bottom, you're in trouble. Don't do that, right? So you get diarrhea, you're condemned. It's a bad move, okay? Men are the penetrators. They take the power. They're always on top. So think that's the way they thought about things. Okay, I'm guessing you probably don't think about things in the same way because the world has changed. It's moved forward. We'll talk about that today when we get to Romans 1, because the Greco-Roman culture does shift a little bit, but it holds up to a lot of the same ancient Near Eastern worldviews as the Hebrew Bible does. This is all review. So if you're not catching all this, go back and watch those other ones. I just want to bring us back to the spot where we're at. Then we started looking at text. We're looking at Leviticus 18, Leviticus 20, and Sodom and Gomorrah text. Okay, those are the ones that we've been looking at recently. We're gonna pick up at Sodom and Gomorrah, but just a reminder of what's happening in Leviticus. Again, order questions. Okay, as we're exegeting things, we want to know what's the order. Well, if it's against, and you can look up this text and go back and read these or look at our videos on it. If it's an order thing, is it possible that the dominant person is in control and therefore abusing or subduing in some way somebody who's not dominant? Whether you want to call that pedophilia, pederasty, somebody in a dominant position has control over somebody else, and that's the problem. Okay, again, not an orientation question, an action question, but not even just an action question among unequals. It's possible that that's what Leviticus is doing. I'm not so persuaded, but that's going to be up for you and your interpretive abilities here. But one thing we got to remember when we're dealing with Leviticus is that we're dealing with holiness code. We're dealing with a specific thing that's going on in a particular set of text in the middle of Leviticus. Okay? Or we can just ignore the holiness code altogether and just talk about the fact that we're dealing with Leviticus. Leviticus is a cultic book. It's a book that is about the worship of Yahweh and how you come closer and closer to holiness. Okay? And so there are certain things that allow you into that holiness move, and there are certain things that take you out of that holiness move. Okay, that is, you become more contaminated. Okay, those aren't necessarily sinful things. Touching dead bodies, menstruating, all these things are not bad necessarily, but they do remove you from that the closeness to God during that time. And you just have to do something in order to get back. You got to wash your hands, or you got to go bathe, or you got to do, say your Hail Marys, or whatever it is that you got to do in order to get back in good with this situation. All right, so that's Leviticus when we're dealing with that one. Leviticus 20 took us one step further, and whereas in Leviticus 18, it seems like it's condemning one person in this group. By the time we get to Leviticus 20, both are condemned to death for whatever it is that's happening there, for this sexual act among same sex. Okay, so we've talked about these, we've dealt with them. We didn't come up with answers, but I've warned you from the very beginning, I'm not going to come up with answers. I'm just going to try and say, here's what's going on in the text, and let you kind of come to some conclusions on that. We did talk for a little while about how law works, just since we're dealing with Leviticus. We just want to be very careful when we think through law kinds of questions, as if these are things that are, because they show up in the Bible, that they are now, this is the way it is from now until eternity for every group of people. Okay, that's sometimes when we think of the Bible gets handed down on high, right? Like it's the Quran almost, that God just like, and you just grab it, and now it's this, you got it, which isn't the way the Bible is supposed to be understood. Even if you believe in inspiration, it's an organic inspiration, right? God speaks through his people for a particular time. So laws are nothing more than, momentary wisdom. They're things that exist during a particular time for a group of people. It's what wisdom looks like at their time, okay, in their culture and their particular understanding. And the Bible is constantly competing against each other too. This is how Hebrew meditation literature works. It introduces you to something, and then people make comments on that and discuss these things to see where they can end up, which would be a really healthy thing for evangelicals to start thinking about, actually. That we just see it as literature that we can embrace and have conversations about. This is what Jesus is doing, right, in the New Testament. People are like, hey, what do you think about this? And he's like, well, here's where I stand on this issue. And of course, we as Christians who think he's God, then we're like, yeah, we stand there too. Good job, Jesus, right? But for them, it was just another one of the rabbis is giving their particular views on something. So got to be careful when we think about laws, as if laws are things that are forever and not wisdom statements. Okay, so I think it's dangerous for us to say, hey, the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it, as if it's some sort of a rule for you to follow. Okay, you don't follow tons of the laws in the Bible, right? None of you keep the Sabbath, even though it's one of the 10 Commandments that you want put on the courtroom walls. Nobody keeps it. So figure out what you want to do with that one. Right. For sure, you like shellfish, and you are wearing fabrics that are mixed, and you plant things near each other. And when your house has mold in it, you don't set it on fire. Like there's all kinds of things that you don't do. None of you have fences around your roof, because you realize that's not what they're trying to say. It's trying to do something different. But then when it comes to this one, you're like, no, this one is the ethical one we have to hold to. And remember, we spent a while kind of talking about that split between moral law, ceremonial law, and civil law. And this is how we in our Protestant circles think about things. It's not the way the early church thought about things. It's not the way the Bible thought about things. These are arbitrary things that we put on there to help us think through things. Okay, but the Bible never says one thing's a moral law and one's a ceremonial law. We have to figure out which ones are that in order to keep our categories right, which I don't think we should even have the categories at all. Just get rid of them. It's a lot easier. Okay. The last one is Sodom and Gomorrah. So all that was review to get to this one, which we started and we read. The Sodom and Gomorrah passage, right, where we get the idea of sodomy. Everyone thinks that it has to do with homosexuality. We read it last week. We're not going to reread it this time. You can take a look at it. It's in Genesis chapter 19. 2 angels arriving at Sodom, and then a crowd of people come, and they say, deliver to us your guests that you had there so that we can, let's see here, bring them out to us so we can have sex with them, is what my version says. And Lot says, no, don't do that. Here are my daughters. Have your way with them instead. Whew. And we won't even talk about how horrible Lot is in this. But apparently he's doing better than the crowd somehow. Because their world, that's a bad thing. What they're doing is bad. We compared it with Judges chapter 19. So Genesis 19 and Judges 19, which is also a story about a similar thing where a guest comes into the house and they want to take advantage of them, but it's not males and males. So both stories are about a group wanting to overpower and debase a guest in the house. So we talked about what this was last week, whether it was a question of homosexuality, and we said it does seem to be homosexuality, an act, right? That they want to have sex with these men. Much better for it to be closer. Let's go back up to that one. Yeah. But is that the problem? Okay. And so Ezekiel and Jude will give different answers as to what they think the problem is. So the author of Genesis has something in mind, but later interpreters are going to go back and interpret these things. So this is a good time for me to bring back up the exegetical things that you guys if you've been listening to me for a while, you'll remember, right? Here's the church. This is us and our nice tie, right? And we're scholars. Wait, I should have a scholar hat on. Okay. And we have our binoculars and we're looking into the past. And we're looking at this world, which we call the event world. And then we're looking at this world, which is called the author's world. So something is happening here, maybe, but an author is interpreting that event in a particular way. Then there's the other world. Okay, this is the us world. Most people try to look back at the event and then bring it into themselves, right? They try to say, okay, now I will use this for myself. Here's how I will apply this passage. What they're doing is they're grabbing hold of the author's world. They don't realize it, but they're grabbing hold of the author's world and applying it to themselves. You got to see the difference between those two things. All I'm making the case for right now is that there's another world in here that interprets the author's interpretation of the event. Does that make sense? If you've been here for a while, it makes perfect sense because I bring it up every 4 to 6 weeks just to remind you. But this is very important. There's a lot of interpretive moves. Even in the us world, there's so many different other worlds. So this might be prophets. Prophets might be interpreting Genesis, interpreting an event. This could be, David in the Psalms and doing the same thing. Or it could be Paul, or it could be Matthew. In some sense, it could be Jesus, but we don't have any actual words. We don't know what Jesus said. All we know is Matthew's version of Jesus. So even Matthew is interpreting Jesus's words, right, and putting them down for us. But then also there's 1,000 other ones, like how about Augustine or Tertullian or whatever else. Okay, so all these people are interpreting these different things. So judges might be interpreting the Sodom story. And for sure, Ezekiel later on is doing that. So we'll put Ezekiel in this spot right here. Ezekiel says, as you'll remember, we're about to have me stop talking and you start talking more. Ezekiel 16 says, now this was the sin of your sister Sodom. She and her daughters were arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. They did not help the poor and needy. They were haughty and did detestable things before me. Therefore, I did away with them, as you have seen. So if you were to ask, why did the fire and brimstone, the hailstones fall on Sodom and Gomorrah? Ezekiel tells you the reason. Gay sex. Nope, it's not there, right? It says arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. And they didn't help the poor and needy. They were haughty and they did detestable things before me. So maybe there you'll be like, oh, there it is. See, right there. But notice all the things that go in line with what the detestable things are. Arrogant, overfed, and unconcerned. We don't often see that preached, do we?
That sounds like our church, the American church.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. Arrogant, overfed, and haughty. Yeah. I mean, unconcerned. Yeah. This is a great sermon. Okay. That's where we stopped last week. Okay. But we didn't finish Sodom and Gomorrah. We just stopped because I didn't want to get into Jude because it takes a few minutes to talk about Jude. And once we talk about Jude, all I really want to talk about after that is Romans. I think Paul's going to give us our best clues as to what's going on here, and Romans is complicated. So, but we got to finish the Jude part here. So let's go to Jude chapter 1, verse 7, which is another one of those passages that we know talks about homosexuality. Jude 1, verse 7. Anybody want to just read that for me? I think I'll go back out here now.
This is the best version. It's the most accurate NASB.
Aha, yes, okay, sure. Apparently you didn't take my 16-week course on what the best version is, but that's fine.
That's right. That's right. It says, just as Sodom and Gomorrah and not cities around them, since they, in the same way as these, indulged in gross immorality and went after strange flesh and exhibited as an example and undergoing the punishment of eternal fire.
Okay. So here we go. Sexual immorality and perversion or strange flesh. So actually your NASB does a better job, I think, than mine. So good job, Josh. Mine just says perversion. Yours says strange flesh, which is the word heterosarkos. So strange or other flesh. It's a much better translation. So what do you see here? Who are they in this? They serve as an example of those who suffer.
The people of Sodom and Gomorrah?
Okay.
Bad false teachers that Jude is writing the letter about.
Okay. All right. Well, let's go at least one verse back. We could go all the way back 5 verses. I mean, it's only one quick letter if we wanted to, right? But let's take a look at verse 6 and bring it forward there. Anybody got that one?
Yeah, I think Riston's right. It says, and angels who did not keep their own domain, but abandoned their proper abode, he has kept in eternal bonds under darkness for the judgment of the great day.
Okay. So what's the problem?
Angels did not keep their own domain.
Okay. Angels didn't keep their own domain, which takes us back to that original thing that we talked about early on in this one and what we talk about almost every week. Order, right? There's an order problem here. People are not staying where they're supposed to stay. You got to stay in your box. Divine beings have one box. Human beings have another box. Stay in your box. They're not doing it. They've left their domain, whatever that means, their proper dwelling. And he's kept them in eternal chains in the deepest darkness of judgment. And then likewise, Sodom and Gomorrah and the surrounding cities, in the same manner, they indulged in sexual immorality and pursued heterosarkos as an example. They serve as an example by undergoing a punishment of eternal fire. So heterosarkos means other flesh. So what is Jude thinking is going on here in this Sodom and Gomorrah story?
Angels crossed boundaries they weren't supposed to.
Yeah. And people cross boundaries they weren't supposed to.
Yes, I think this is the inverse of Genesis 6, where
Good.
Genesis 6, yeah, the angels come down and have their way with the daughters of men, but here it's the opposite. The men want to have their way with these angels.
Okay. All right. So just to remind you, Genesis 6, right, we did this when we talked about the deities, dragons, death, etc., and we've met it in Genesis too. So we've seen this a lot of times. I had to get in Jude when we went through and exegeted all of Jude, but this is fan fiction. First Enoch is fan fiction of this Genesis 6 story. Jude has grabbed hold of First Enoch. Some of you are sitting here and going, I have no idea what you're talking about. First Enoch's not in the Bible. That's right, it's not. Or it's not in the Bible that you use. It's in other people's Bible. But you can get it. Just Google First Enoch and you can read it. It's fantastic. It really is. It's just fan fiction about Genesis chapter 6 and what's happening in those first 4 verses right before the flood happens. And you might remember that the angels or the gods at that time, or the sons of men, end up taking the daughters of men. So the sons of God, let me try it again. Sons of God end up taking the daughters of men. And sons of God is just another term for divine beings of that time. So they come down and they fool around with these women or take them as wives, however you want to understand that, have children, create these demigods, right? This is all part of the mythology of the Genesis people, but it's also hugely a part of Enoch, even though that's going to come 500 or 600 years later, the book of First Enoch, probably sometime around the New Testament time period. Okay, so, and you remember the story, angels come down, or angels, gods, whatever they are, and they teach these women horrible things like sorcery and charms and cutting roots and plants and wearing makeup, for crying out loud, and jewelry, and all the horrible, sinful things that women do is because of these gods that were there and came down there and convinced them to do that. And because of this, Michael, you know from Scripture, and Raphael, you don't, but he's part of that world too, the traditions that they would have. Michael and Raphael are told to imprison the angels and to bind Azael hand and foot and throw him into darkness. And to take Shemahaza, which is another one of these, and the others, bind them for generations in the valleys of the earth until the day of judgment and consummation. All that stuff. I bet they taught the women to read too. That was the final straw. Yep. And now they're voting, for crying out loud. Like, the order has just gone completely off the rails. Yeah, so it's all the gods' fault. The bad gods, of course, not God himself. So these gods who cross the domain that they shouldn't cross. So Jude might be suggesting what? What's the problem? You said angels and, going outside the bounds, but it's mankind going outside the bounds. Josh started moving into this. Is the problem homosexuality for him?
It's human to angelic transgression.
Yeah. So some people read Jude as if that's what he's talking about. Like, the problem isn't homosexuality. I mean, we're talking about strange flesh, right? Heterosarkos, that term. Other flesh, like really other. Really, really other. Okay, divine beings. So it's angel rape. Okay, it's not just rape. Remember, it's not just homosexuality to begin with. It's rape. That's a very different thing than homosexuality. But second of all, according to Jude, it's angel rape. That's the biggest problem. So maybe that is what Jude is saying. Other flesh, sex with angels. So,
but angels are men, correct?
Angels aren't men, but yeah, they take the form of men, but they're not men. They're divine. They're
No,
other beings.
I'm talking about the parts.
Yeah, that's what we'd assume, that they are real men, that they come. Yep. Yeah, we never see females in angelic form.
Except on a church Christmas program.
Right, exactly. We need the all the girls with the blonde hair, and yeah, that's what we think of as angels. Yep. So this is about assault. It's about how you treat strangers. It's about raping angels that come into your area, right? Like, it's not really about homosexuality. And I mean, completely, like, I don't even know any scholars who think Sodom and Gomorrah story is about that. Even if they think homosexuality is 100% wrong, and the Bible speaks towards that and everything, they don't think the Sodom and Gomorrah story is about that. They're just like, yeah, that's just not part of our, yeah, you're right, that's not part of it. We're going to argue it from Romans or from Leviticus or something else. So
Isn't
Anyway,
there an implicitness to the fact that it's called Sodom as a city, and that's the same word that's used for the uh, homosexual act?
yes, but that word for sodomy is much later, based on interpretations of that passage as homosexuality. What I'm saying is, when they came up with that English word, they chose poorly. They shouldn't have looked at Sodom and Gomorrah's story as their reasoning for such a thing. But yeah, we're stuck with a label now. Like, I don't think we can change that.
Well, you're in cancel culture. I'm just kidding, but they start canceling stuff and changing stuff.
Okay, anything else to about Old Testament, about Hebrew Bible, which is where I excel, if I excel anywhere? Those are the areas I can help you with. We're about to move into the Greek. So far, you'll have noticed I have not made any decisions on what you should think about these things, right? Just trying to look at the texts and say, are we being fair to the texts? I'm
So
not
is it
sure.
saying is
Go
it
ahead, Bob.
is it saying that the angels or sons of gods are just going outside of what they're supposed to do
Mm-hmm.
and not necessarily, you said, rape?
Are we talking about? Are you asking the question about Genesis 6, or about Enoch, or about Jude?
Yes.
Ha ha ha. Okay, so they all have probably different intentions in what it is that they're trying to get across. I think Genesis 6, personally, is an introduction to the flood narrative. So basically saying, you thought it was bad that Cain killed Abel. You thought it was bad that this guy comes in later and kills seven. You think it was bad that it's just like they keep getting worse and worse and worse with all these things. And this is the last straw for God. Genesis 6. Like, even the angels have transgressed their boundaries. Cain did it. Yep. I mean, all these people have done it. But now it's not even just people. Now it's the angel. Like, this place is a mess. It's become tohu vabohu. Right? For those of you who remember your Genesis stuff, it's become complete chaos. Even remember the whole idea of heaven, of the creation story is, right, make their light and then separate the light from the darkness, and then or separate the firmament, right? Separate this way the waters, and then separate the waters this way. That's the creation story, or the ordering story, so that he can place his man in there. And then Genesis 6 is the exact opposite. It's an uncreation story. It's where everything collapses on itself. And the reason it all collapses on itself is because the icon, man, inside here has just messed it up so bad. And now heaven itself is coming down. Earth is we've just made a complete mess of it. And so God just fine, just collapse this whole thing. We'll start over again. So he cleans it all up and he reorders and recreates the world. So that's what's going on in Genesis 6, I think. Jude, I think, is doing something a little bit different. It's blaming mankind for, in the Sodom story, it's blaming these men for being inhospitable and taking advantage of, specifically of the divine in this case, but also just being dominatrix. Is that what you be? Being subduers, the forcers.
Sadist.
Yeah.
Isn't true? Is there a point that the earth is out of bounds from all spiritual things, more or less?
So, go ahead, Josh.
No, I think in Ephesians, and it talks about, and especially in chapter 6, and there's other parts, Paul talks about the heavenly realms, and it's talking about here, the heavenly realms gets misinterpreted as we think it's heaven, but it's not, because it's he says against the evil things in the heavenly realms. And it's like, how can evil be in the heavenly realms? And it's really Paul's talking about the spiritual realm on earth where things are a mess, where it's discombobulated. And so maybe that's how they were thinking of Pops's question. Like they're thinking in that age, like, no, the earth is filled with these, these, demonic or demons or whatever.
Yeah, so the world they lived in was filled with gods, right? Just think mythologically. This is the way everybody would have thought back in. It's filled with gods, and they're everywhere. The problem is that they're not supposed to interfere in the lives of mankind. They're not supposed to be doing those kinds of things. So now angelology is going to change a lot between Genesis writing, probably we're talking about what, 6th century, something like that, to all the way to 1st century and even Common Era. So in 500, 600 years, your angelology is going to progress to such an extent. They would have seen angels, right? They have a whole different understanding of angels in the Old Testament than they do in the New Testament or the later Old Testament. So I think that they would have realized that they would be together, but their angelology changes so much that they would think, well, there can't be marriage in heaven because angels don't marry or intermarry or do things like that. They start thinking through those things differently. So I do think they can be a part of that world, but they've transgressed by creating a new race of super beings with humans or with the divine. That becomes the biggest problem, I think.
Okay, the reason I'm going this way is that the angels came and interfered and did things wrong, the sons of God, sons of gods, whatever. And then Jesus comes and he interferes and does things right and shows us where we should be living, not in this world, but in the spiritual world.
Yeah. Yep, that would be a cool application for us to grab from what's going on in the New Testament. Yep. And you could call Jesus a super being too, in that sense. The one who's trying to clarify what the role is supposed to be. Yeah. The difference, of course, is that Jesus is not just that, he's also 100% man. So that's the beauty of that theology, is that he can live all of that out right here with us. But yeah, there's a lot to that, Jesus clarifying things for us.
I can see where Pops is going too, because if they're able to come into this realm, why is it an abomination or whatever for them to come into the realm in Genesis 6 or whatever? But my other thoughts were, and I was going to ask this earlier, those angels, that the sons of God who came down, are they some assumed to be the fallen angels of like Isaiah 14, or I think that's Isaiah 14. Or Ezekiel, whatever in Ezekiel.
Oh, you're talking about the Satan in those passages?
Yeah, yeah, where apparently there's fallen angels, and some would postulate or hypothesize that this is where the fallen angels come out of heaven and have their way with mess everything up.
I don't know what you're talking about in Isaiah, so I just can't remember what it is you're referring to right now, or it's just not clicking for me.
Just the fallen angels, the idea of fallen angels becoming demons. This is in Enoch too, I think.
So, the only fallen angels passage that I can think of off the top of my head is in Revelation, and it's not about fallen angels, but it just sounds like it is. But that's just, my head is just not wrapping around this right now. So you could find it and show me what you're talking about.
No, and I don't think I'm not thinking that I don't want you to think that I think they're fallen angels. I'm just thinking through what other people might think about this passage in Genesis 6, where these fallen creatures become demons, and then that's why there's just this.
Yeah, and so this is again a question of how angelology moves, right? We can't talk about a Jewish way of thinking about angels or about gods. There are a variety of paths that people would have taken. So certain ones will win out. But remember, even in the New Testament, we've got the Pharisees debating certain things and the Sadducees disagreeing with them. There's always a conversation to be had. So yes, some of them would see these daimonos as fallen angels that have been kicked out of heaven. And so you might see some of that in the book of Revelation. Other people would not have thought that. They would have thought them as chaos beings that existed from the beginning of time. So, and this is true of the early church too. They would have interpreted it different ways.
It's Isaiah 14:12 that talks about the morning star and falling from that the morning star passage.
Oh, okay. So it is the Satan passage that you're talking about. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, we've done that one. That's going to take a little while for me to go back and explain that this is not, it has nothing to do with what we're talking about right now. So, yes, I'm sure that some people may have interpreted things that way, but I don't think Isaiah is doing that. Isaiah is doing something very different with the Satan passage, right? There is a myth out there that it's based on. So yeah, you're right in that sense. I don't know how far down that road I should go in order to keep us on the homosexuality track.
Yeah, I didn't want to take us off track. I was more thinking of the thread that Pops is going on. I'm sorry.
Yep. I want to clarify all that stuff though. I'm not saying that it's wrong for them to cross some sort of imaginary boundary, like a firmament boundary. I'm saying you're not allowed to have sex with women angels. That's the problem, right? So you have your own people. You go do that stuff. You don't be creating a new race of beings down here. So this is where we get the giants and all the other problems. And giants, remember we talked about, are always the bad guys. They're always the people that come before the people who are what to take the land now. And it's what we do. We always create a myth about the people who were here before and how evil they were so that they need to be destroyed. We're not going to make any connections about that right now in our political scene, but yeah, this is just what happens. Okay. Any other questions about any of that before we jump into Romans for 30 minutes? Unless we have to go a lot longer, then we'll just do it another week. So. All right, Romans chapter 1. We're going to do a horrible job because I need to just exegete all of Romans with you, and I can't do that, right? It just take forever. But Romans is making one large argument. It's not a systematic theology textbook on salvation. Okay, if you read it that way, then you're going to end up becoming either Reformed or Arminian or, and none of those questions are at all what Paul's thinking about. He has a completely different thing in mind. Remember what Paul is. He's a pastor, a missionary, really. Okay, he's not a systematic theologian, and any theology he's working out right there with God and with other people. He's a Pharisee, and he thinks like they do. So let's see how he thinks, because verse 26 gets us started on this road. Does anybody want to read verse 26 and verse 27? This is Paul's case against homosexuality. Maybe.
I can handle it, Jace.
All right, go ahead. In the Greek, David, go.
Oh, not quite. Not quite. I'd be tempted, but not quite.
You can. I've heard you do it. You're pretty good at it. So
yeah.
All right, in English.
Anyway, for this reason, God gave them up to dishonorable passions. For the women exchanged natural relations for those that are contrary to nature, and the men likewise gave up natural relations with women and were consumed with passion for one another, men committing shameless acts with men and receiving in themselves the due penalty for their error.
All right. So, I'm guessing as you read this, you'd have a hard time thinking that Paul is not against homosexuality here. Like, at least the action, maybe not the orientation again, right? Remembering all that stuff. Like, this is a hard text. If you want to argue that homosexuality is not a sin, this is a hard one to try and get a different direction. Okay, now, hopefully, we're not trying to get anything out of the text. We're just trying to figure out what Paul's doing. Because remember this, you're not going to hear this from very many pastors. What Paul's doing doesn't necessarily mean you have to come down in the same direction. So you can be honest with the text and say, I think Paul thinks this, And then you can say, I think Paul was a man of his time and I don't agree with him. Okay, now people will disagree with me as to whether you're a Christian if you could do that or things like that. I'm just saying you can do, regardless of what anybody thinks, you can. You can just say, no, I don't agree. Like you can pick and choose any parts you want from the Bible as to be real. You can do whatever you want. I don't know if that's a very consistent, good hermeneutic, but you can do it. Okay, so it's perfectly fine if you come out with whatever conclusion you want. I just want to see, what's Paul think? What's his conclusion? Then we can determine whether we agree with it or not. So let's go back and remember the world that they live in. Okay, not as ancient Near Eastern as the one we were talking about before, but the Greco-Roman culture has a lot of the same things in it. Okay, we still have an order, hierarchy kind of situation that's going on there. Very influenced by this, by viewing like sexual desire as an urge of the flesh that generally should be suppressed. Paul especially seems to think that. Remember some of those verses he talks about sex? Forget the homosexuality things, just remember all the other things he talks about, right? He seems to be against almost anything except for procreation. And at this time in his life, pretty much against everything. He's like, don't even get married. Like, Jesus is coming back, dude. Like we shouldn't be doing any of that stuff. Like, let's focus on these things. So some people at this time are remembering their old Bible and their debates about, whether you can have sex when you're pregnant or menstruating or like all these kinds of questions. These are all sexual questions that they're asking. Some are arguing that it is, you shouldn't enjoy sex. It should just be for a purpose. There should be no joy in it whatsoever. And if you are going to get married, then it's only because you can't handle, you got your urges. And that's, these are base urges that you just can't control. So, all right, fine. Go ahead and get married so that you're not out there, with every single person. At least you've got one person. So these are a few of the things that are going on in their world. Remember the sexual orientation question, right? Their framework is different than ours. It would have been talking about hierarchy. Remember that freeborn men who took the active role in sexuality were seen to be dominant, virile, powerful. Like that's what men were. Men, kind of like toxic masculinity of today. If you've heard some of the stuff that I've seen going on social media and stuff, oh my goodness. But anybody who is assuming the passive role in this would have been seen, like we talked about before, as something's just wrong with them, right? Philo called it the feminizing disease, right? They wouldn't have understood. It's sort of been a pathological problem. And yeah, all right. I mean, I got a whole bunch of things in here about pederasty and prostitution and social hierarchy and stuff like that. But maybe it's better for us just to kind of like look at this and see, like, what do you think he's saying? What do you think's happening at this particular point in his argument? You're watching this argument. I mean, we can just look at the argument. Acts, Romans, chapter 1. Can't get to Romans chapter 1. All right, so he says hello. He thanks God for them, talks about the power of the gospel, and then he's talking about how bad the world is, right? Humankind. Who's he talking about when he's talking about humankind and how bad they are? Yeah. I mean, is it clear?
Everybody.
Everybody? Okay.
Until you're saved and moving in the other direction through God's growth.
Okay. All right. So in their world, remember, there are two kinds of people, right? So this is a big hermeneutical clue as you are reading anything in the New Testament. Anytime you start applying the New Testament directly to yourself, remember what it is that they're dealing with in their world. They are dealing with the question of Jews and Gentiles. It's always on their minds. Jesus's parables, Paul's different conversations, they're all going to come down to questions like this. Like, who is the kingdom for? Do we let them in? Especially Paul. Okay, remember, we even call him the missionary to the Gentiles. Okay, so he is writing this book, Romans, to all kinds of different people, but he says, I'm not ashamed of the gospel. He's talking about the Jew first and also the Greek. The righteousness of God is revealed, I'm in verse 17, through faith for faith, as is written, the one who's righteous will live by faith. Okay? The righteous ones are the people who God loves, of course. They're the ones that are doing things right. But the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and injustice of those who by their injustice suppress the truth. So this group of people, whoever they are, their hearts are darkened, verse 21 says. They're without excuse. Even though they knew God, this is 21, they didn't honor him. So they knew him, but they didn't honor. They didn't really know him. So they should have known him, is what we're going to get to. Claiming to be wise, they became fools. They exchanged the glory of the immortal God for images resembling a mortal human or birds or four-footed animals or reptiles. So people who started worshiping other things in the place of God. So the things God created, the created things instead of the creator. Therefore, God gave them over in their desires of their hearts to impurity, to dishonoring. Okay, this is verse 24. To the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves. They exchanged the truth about God for a lie and worshiped and served the Creator rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. So most people are going to say this first chapter is a setup. Okay? Paul is writing, the Jews are reading this. They are very happy to read about those people who are unrighteous. Those bad guys in the world, okay, which are, the Gentiles. Paul's going to have a lot of things to say about them in the future.
Is it true that there's a context for like one of the emperors kicked out the Jews from Rome, and so like the Christian Jews would have been kicked out, the Gentile Christians take over the church, and so now the Christian Jews are coming back, and the Gentile Christians are in control of the church. So they're going to be happy that Paul's poking at the people in control of the churches they used to be in control of. Like,
I've heard that. I haven't spent a lot of time in Romans, but I have heard that. I assume that that's correct. Yes. This is what happens when you get into Romans and me and Paul. But yep. Yeah. So David was nodding his head too.
Wasn't it Claudius? And when we talk about Aquila and Priscilla being sent out of Rome, and that's how they end up meeting Paul. So I think you're on the right track. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so we get to verse 26. For this reason, God gave them over to dishonorable passions. Their females exchanged natural intercourse for unnatural, and in the same way, the males giving up natural intercourse with females were consumed with their passionate desires for one another. Males committed shameless acts with males and received in their own persons the due penalty for their error. So God gives them over to shameful lusts, right? Gave them over. Okay, they're reading this. Them, them. He gave them over. They're the horrible people here. They're a mess. They're under the power of sin. That's what Romans is going to be about, right? Is this group of people that are under the power of sin. So he's pulling in his Jewish readers. The Jews know these terrible Gentiles. Chapter 2, he's going to flip the script on them. Okay, he's going to say exactly what Tom said. This is all of you, right? It's actually every one of you. The Jews are just as bad in all of this. So how do we know they're sinful? What's his reasoning here? Natural and unnatural. What do you think about that? Their females exchange natural for unnatural, males giving up natural for shameless acts with males. You've heard natural theology before, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you remember even Clarence Thomas and his when he was up for justice, right? He kept saying his appeal was to natural creation, natural order, natural theology, right? Just like this is just the way the world's made. He didn't want to say God, so he said, just the way the world is. Is it natural or unnatural? What's happening here?
Yeah, my thoughts were that natural means order and unnatural means like chaos, or that what we've been talking about, out of order.
I think he's referring to just what's accepted in that culture at that time, what's custom. Because other times when he uses natural and unnatural, he's talking about like hair length and things like that. So I think it's just what's natural for them in their culture.
Yeah, this is pretty significant, right? This is the way Paul thinks about what's natural. Okay, so even if we get up to there, so the Gentiles should have been able to observe, according to Paul, what's natural, what's obvious to them, to deduce that God is worthy of worship and all that. They didn't, so now they're without excuse. So God hands them over to these dishonorable passions, and he lets them go so far past where everybody else goes. Like we Jews, we might have our problems, but oh my gosh, he's let them go over into ridiculousness. The misguided Gentiles are unconstrained by God, so they'll do anything. Like they'll even do this kind of stuff. And of course, these kind of sexual acts for them are connected to all of their idolatry. They're worshiping created things. It's the only explanation. Why are Gentiles so messed up? It's because they're rebels. They worship creation over creators, and God lets them have all these perversions, and that's the whole problem. And the presupposition is natural for him. What is natural? Even their women exchange natural sexual relations for unnatural ones. So this word paraphysin is unnatural. Paraphysin is it's their cultural norm, like Lori was saying. This is the thing that they would see that's outside of what fits in their category. We talked about the ick factor early on, right? We would find it very strange to eat a dog or a cat. We would find it almost evil, maybe. Okay? But that's a cultural thing. We eat chickens and nobody cares, right? Why? It's not totally arbitrary. There are reasons, but it's just one of those things that's stuck in our mind the way they have to be. So Robert Jewett says Paul is raising a cultural norm to the level of a natural and thus biological principle. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now you don't have to agree, but this commentator is saying that. Lori suggested that. I see it throughout Paul. Yeah. Right? That he's seeing something in his world and he's saying, this is what natural is. It's biological. It has to be this way. So Lori mentioned Corinthians. I don't know if she knew it was in Corinthians. We'll assume she knew it was in Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians 11, where he says, doesn't even nature itself teach that if a man wears long hair, it's dishonorable to him? Right? Doesn't even nature tell you that a long-haired man this is a dishonor. This is not the way it's supposed to be. And the proper answer to that, to Paul, is, no, Paul, nature doesn't say that. So you either find yourself agreeing with Paul that it is unnatural, in which case I think you have to condemn all the men that are wearing long hair, or you have to realize this is a cultural norm during his particular time. Yeah. So now you're starting to say, I don't know if I do agree with Paul on everything. And as soon as you go down that road, you don't know where you're going to be next. Right? I'm not sure I can handle what Paul's saying here. I don't like this very much.
My wife says that dirty hippies are going to hell. I'm just, she's
exactly. Yes.
Not that way at all.
Yep. And this gets us back to a conversation we had last week or the week before, that Robert Gagnon, if you've ever read any of his stuff on this, he's he's very far on the conservative side of this, and he says this is a natural. It's obvious, right? It's obvious. We know that a man fits inside of a woman in a particular way. It's obvious. It's natural. And then last week, I think somebody brought up some other things. There are other things that fit inside of other things pretty normally too. Anyway, we don't want to get into all that. Like, it might not be quite as easy as we think, but for sure, I mean, that does work. It procreates. Everything works there, but we just want to be careful with this. Verse 27, in the same way, the men also abandoned natural relations with women and were inflamed with lust for one another. Men committed shameful acts with other men and received in themselves the due penalty for their error. So, after bringing them along, he moves to this verse 27 to speak of men. They receive their penalty or their their recompense for their shameful acts. Philo says that recompense is something like unusual soreness or a disease of feminization. Again, he calls that some kind of addiction or pathology that causes this to come about. And so that's the reasons for all this stuff. All right, so we have the text. I did realize that there is one verse in 1 Corinthians that we should probably look at too. So we may end up going another week. But what is this? What are you going to do with this text? Does this lead you in any directions?
One thing that has struck me about it, Jace, is what follows.
Okay,
I mean,
good.
If you go back to 18, he says the wrath of God is revealed, and then you have this therefore in 24, God gave them up to the lust of their hearts, and then you have the next segment in 26, men doing and then since they did not see fit to acknowledge God, gave them up to a debased mind to do what ought not to be done, manner of unrighteous evil, covetousness, malice, full of envy, murder, strife. So it's almost like he's saying, this is worse than what I was talking about already.
That's right.
Progression.
Yeah. Yeah, I let you go this far, and you did it. Now I'm going to let you go even further. You just keep going.
You're even disobedient to parents.
Yeah, that's right. We know what happens to dishonorable children, right?
Yeah.
Yep. They get killed.
Yeah.
All the words seem to point to excessive, whatever, like, even like the same sex might be product of excessive sexual desire or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. In this context of it going forward like this. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for a more of a liberal. By the way, just for the record, my wife is not like that at all. She likes hippies.
We know.
Because I'm a hippie. I wear patchouli. Yeah, I'm a hippie. Anyways, Paul, it seems to be a more liberal stance would say Paul is addressing idolatry and excess rather than orientation.
Yep.
Obviously, the conservative view is what we're talking about.
And remember, there's an argument taking place. It's not just to say, hey, homosexuality is sinful, if that's what it's saying at all. It's trying to get things, he's moving up of these things, and that's one of the things in his world that is beyond him. Like, these are things that Christians shouldn't be doing, and he's just making this list to get to the point that he can flip the script. It's a rhetorical device.
Yeah.
Keep getting worse and worse and worse. Go ahead, Travis.
Yeah, this isn't the list of what they should and shouldn't do, I don't think, if you look at the structure of Romans. This is the snare to make people listen to what he's about to say. Like what Paul's doing in the beginning is saying, y'all are guilty. Gentiles are guilty, yes. Jewish Christians, you're guilty too. There's stuff in there for them too later on. And our salvation is through faith, talks about all that. The list of how the church should live comes later in Romans when he talks about like how the church should live later. I don't know if this stuff gets repeated later. So like he's saying this, like you said, as a rhetorical device to say, hey, you got to listen to me. And he's doing it broadly and generally instead of just being like, hey, if you do pederasty, hey, if you're an effeminate, hey, because if I make a list of specifics and I am a person, I can say, well, I didn't do that, that, or that. But if I just do the generic, crap, I'm guilty. He got me. And so that's what I think he's doing in the beginning.
Yep. So rhetorical approach.
Yeah, because doesn't it lead up to like Romans 3:23, that whole idea of we all fall short
Yep.
of God's glory, or we all sin and fall short of the glory.
Which is his way of saying Jews too.
Right.
You think you're the chosen people. You're just as big a mess. Yep. And remember, Paul's broader theological framework is about love, mutual respect, like all those kinds of things, right? And remember that he can't see this way of like he can't see a relationship that is mutually respectful and loving, because that's not the world that they lived in. There weren't, two men that lived together and had a child and loved each other. That he just could not comprehend something like that. That doesn't happen. So just another thing to think about. They're doing this. Okay, well, here's the last little piece. Let's think this through here real quick. I don't want to say a lot, so maybe I'll just say this, and then we'll save our conversation about it till next week. I'll just have to make a decision whether I want Alan to come in, do his talk, and then we'll have a big talk about all this, just wherever you guys want to go. But 1 Corinthians 6:9 has these two words, and I just wanted to throw them out to you because they're thought about a lot. So 1 Corinthians comes right after Romans, chapter 6, verse 9. Anybody who's got it can read it for me. Somehow I beat you guys to this passage. It's amazing. All right. Do you not know that wrongdoers will not inherit the kingdom of God? Do not be deceived. The sexually immoral, the idolaters, the adulterers, the male prostitutes, the men who engage in illicit sex, thieves, greedy, drunkards, revilers, swindlers, none of these will inherit the kingdom of God. So among that list are two words that are, or two phrases, two words that are very difficult to figure out. So one is the word malakoi, and one is the word arsenokotai. So malakoi usually is something like softies. Okay, it's probably the best way you could translate it, softies. So someone who's soft, someone who's receptive. A receptive man might be the best way of saying that. And arsenokoitai is like men betters, right? So it's like it's a male dominant word. It's the one who takes the insertive role, the one who is going after the penetrator. Basically it's saying either direction you're going here, you don't get to inherit the kingdom of God. Okay, now these are guesses as to how to understand these words. Arsenokoitai is not even a real word. It's a made-up word that Paul uses. We're just we're making our best guess as men betters. But no matter what, if your version says homosexuals there anywhere, that's not good. Like that's somebody trying to take you in a certain direction, translated wise. They have to do that, but it's not fair to the text. So just remember, the Bible doesn't talk about homosexuality. It talks about acts of sexuality that are male on male or female on female, perhaps, but not about homosexuality. So those are the passages, and it seems very clear that Paul doesn't seem to be very happy with either set of men. Any comments do you got there?
It's interesting. I was looking. There's a footnote in ESV that says the two Greek terms translated by this phrase refer to the passive and active partners in consensual homosexual acts. So one is the passive, and the other is the active. If you take their version of it.
I think that's what I said. That's what I meant to say. That's what I was trying to say.
Yeah. Well, just I noticed the note.
Yeah. Your note said it way better than me, so thank you for just reading somebody else's culmination of everything that I said. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, so both roles was my point, right? Leviticus seems to give you one side, and then the second Leviticus passage kind of says, oh, yeah, you're both in trouble. And it might be that Paul has in mind those verses, Leviticus, when he's pulling it into his text here. So now you can make all kinds of arguments here in either direction you want. You can say, hey, this is not just regular sex. This is sex that has to do with cultic practices. You could say that it's pedophilia. That's the problem here. Pederasty. You can say it's, anything that goes outside of the normal boundaries. That's not good, loving homosexual relationships that you and I know around us. You can say all those things. Okay, you're gonna have a hard time making this argument like, well, there it is, it's done. Okay.
So which verse were we looking at again?
Verse 9. Say, I think if Paul were to if we were to ask Paul what he thinks, I think he probably has a problem with the act of homosexuality. I don't think he has any clue what world we live in right now. Right? So he wouldn't be able to comprehend what we're saying to him. In his world, those actions clearly went against the order of things as he would have understood it. And he would have guessed that our world would probably be similar. So he would see our world and be like, I have no idea what you mean. What do you mean? Women, when they're having sex, get to sit on top? No. Right? Like that wouldn't comprehend. He wouldn't like that either. Right? Those are things that that they don't fit in his world. So then what our discussion is going to be, hopefully next week. All right, what do we do with this, Paul? How are we going to, do we agree with him? Do we need to re-understand him so that he agrees with us? Or are we okay with him saying what it seems very black and white like he's saying? Knowing, as we do, there's no such thing as black and white. This is what it's saying, right? There's all the context in there. But what do we do with it? But it's 9:15, so we're not going to have that conversation now. Come back next week for the culmination of all of this, where you all tell me what you think and why I'm wrong about everything I think. That'll be super fun. All right, let's cut this, Travis, and then I'm guessing almost everybody will stick